couple of things we're going to be talking about today. We're going to bring Todd McCracken up first. He is the CEO of the National Small Business Association, and I had the good fortune to be on his board for a number of years, and actually chaired the board, which is probably the year he's trying to forget about it. But the fact is, nobody knows more about what's going on that hill, and especially from a business perspective, than Todd McCracken. His bio is in there, so I'm not going to repeat any of that, but I will tell you that he is highly respected there and known by everyone on the Hill. So he is our ticket, our voice for small business in particular there. And I can't begin to tell you the number of things that you don't even realize were done on your behalf as small business people because they never came to light. And it's because of this guy in the National Small Business Association. So with that, Todd, we're going to bring you up and just tell us a little bit about what's happening in that crazy city where your office is. Please welcome Todd McCracken.
Thank you very much. It's always good to go back to Michigan. I did every now and again, and the state is just such a thriving hotbed of entrepreneurship. I just can't get over it. I don't know if you know how appreciate that from where you sit, but it's not the same as other parts of the country, I can assure you. I love to be here. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for all your leadership over the years. I really appreciate your friendship and all that you do for the small business community. So I don't have much time, so I have a whole bunch of things I'm going to try to run through just to sort of get them on your radar screen. I'm going to talk a little bit about what sort of some recent stuff that's happened in Washington, and both legislatively and regulatorily, and then I'm going to try to look ahead a little bit next year and scare you a little bit. First, who are we? What do we do? Chris said a bit of it. We're the oldest national small business advocacy organization. We got started during the Depression, and we were founded by an Ohio printer named DeWitt McKinley Emery, and to this day we are an Ohio corporation. We moved to Washington D.C. in the 40s and have been there advocating on a nonpartisan basis, led by our small business volunteers for these 80 plus years. And I've been there for quite a while too. I really enjoy it because we spend all of our thoughts thinking of what we can do for small business, not what we can do for a party or how we can make friends with this person or that. So unfortunately, that makes us unique in Washington. I wish it weren't so, but unfortunately it is. So that's why we're around, how we try to do our business. You may have heard this past fall, before Congress left for their current, technically it's not a recess, but we'll call it a recess, where they're off campaigning and not legislating right now. Before they did that, they passed a handful of things that they heard about. One was a big tax and spending bill called the Inflation Reduction Act. If you believe it, the Inflation Reduction Act or not, that's what it's called. And it has a whole bunch of stuff in it, but the stuff that's most relevant to small companies that's getting the most attention potentially is this increased funding for the IRS. And that cuts lots of different ways. Over the next decade, they put in about $80 billion of additional dollars into the Internal Revenue Service. On the one hand, there's lots there that we've been advocating for that is needed. Because, as you know, if you try to call the IRS and get a simple question answered, you can't get it done. So their systems need updating. They clearly are understaffed. They need new and different resources, and we're totally on board with that. But there's another big component to the bill, which is increased enforcement, which, again, we think those probably are some areas where we need increased enforcement. But we haven't seen a plan from the IRS for what that's really going to look like. Right? So we are really concerned that small companies, because they don't have tax attorneys on staff and they're not the ones who are in a position to fight back more strongly, might become real targets for IRS, and small companies could face audits that are not deserved, that are not warranted, that they shouldn't be facing. And if you've ever faced those, either personally or in your business, you know just how profoundly disruptive they can be, how much time they take from their business owner running the business and all the rest. So pretty concerned about that. It's not happening tomorrow. The bill just passed. IRS still has to figure out the plan, figure out who exactly they're going to hire, how they're going to do this thing, and then roll it out over years. So we're going to be pretty active over the next year or so with Congress trying to figure out what kind of oversight they should be doing, what kind of questions they should be asking to make sure that the IRS stays focused on helping small businesses more than bringing a hammer down. So that's one thing. The other thing, I don't know how many people are involved in this, but there's an extraordinarily successful federal program called the Small Business Innovative Research Program, SBIR, that we were there at the inception, advocating for its inception 40 years ago. But it has to be reauthorized every so often, and it was supposed to be reauthorized this year. Actually, it was finally, but it was a long, hard battle. So we finally got the Small Business Innovative Research Program reauthorized at the last minute for 3 more years. No increase in funding or any of that, but still we're pretty happy with it, because that really looked like it was not going to happen. But we got it done. If you are involved in that program, watch out. We're going to have some updates, because there are some changes people need to know about in the program as a result of this bill. So they're not all positive. So if you want to know more about that, stay in touch with us. But as I said before, those are some key things that have just happened congressionally. As I said, they're out now, so this is usually a season when you start seeing more on the regulatory front. So the legislative people in the agencies say, okay, this is a good time to propose some new rules or to issue final rules, because Congress isn't here to hold hearings and harangue us about it. So we've seen a little bit more of that than has been the case for the summer. A couple of things I really want to draw your attention to. One is there are new regs out to enforce the Corporate Transparency Act. I don't know if you've heard about that, but that's one of the things that Rob's going to talk about. So I don't want to say too much more about that, because he's got a lot of great comments on that one. But we're deeply concerned about that reporting regime and the way it's structured and all kinds of things. And it's definitely going to be a high priority for us to get that rolled back in some way over the coming months and years. Second, in September, a proposal came out on so-called joint employer rules. And this has been ping-ponged back and forth. The Obama administration, the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration, all taking different approaches on this to sort of countermanding what the previous administration had done or tried to do. But this new rule now, if it goes into effect, basically can make you as a small business subject to a lot of the policies of a larger company you do business with, whether it's a franchise operation or simply a contractor or subcontractor situation. Previous to now, the courts had not found that employees were subject to these rules unless the larger partner had direct and immediate control. Those are the words, direct and immediate control of the employee. But now, if there's a whole raft of other ways that if they think there's potential control, that the policies of the larger company would have to be applied in the smaller company. And that's, of course, going to cause a lot of big companies to decide they no longer want to do business with small businesses and local communities as their contractors. They'll just come in and do it themselves. If they've got to pay the employees the same as the rest of the employees, they've got to pay them, give them the same benefits as their employees, they may as well run the show. So it's going to be, I think, a significant impact on the small business community if that goes forward. So pay attention to that. The other one that just came out this week is new proposed rule, I should say, from the Department of Labor around independent contractors. And it's going to make it much more difficult for small companies to have independent contractors legally. What's interesting, of course, is this is going to the Department of Labor, which has control over wage and hour, overtime rules, that kind of thing. The IRS and Treasury also have oversight over independent contractor in terms of its tax implications. This is not part of that. So small companies have to figure out, from a different agency's perspective, whether or not a particular person working for them is a contractor or an employee. Again, this rule is not final. There are comments that are going to be due around Thanksgiving, and then sometime after that, presumably there'll be a final rule that will come out. So you really should be paying attention to that, especially if you're a company that has contractors in your purview. So I throw that out there. So as I said, the Congress is out. They're going to come back for a lame duck session after the elections. A couple of things are on the agenda. They've got to pass a new spending bill, because when they passed for the election, we extended the government operations into December. And then they've got to reauthorize our defenses. It's the National Defense Authorization Act, which they have to do every so often, is also up for expiration. So they deal with those things. A lot of other stuff we're going to try to get tacked onto that. I don't expect much will. I think they'll pass fairly cleanly in the end of the day, and they'll wind up funding most things next year. But next year could be really interesting for a few reasons. One, Chris mentioned the immigration issue. I think there is a bipartisan realization that we've got to do something about immigration, and there's been a recent court rulings on DACA that are creating a need to address that from that perspective. But so if there is an immigration bill, I do think a lot of the additional things that we want to see could get included in that and allow additional skilled workers to come to this country or to stay in this country if they are came here for college and take those jobs. And one thing we're really advocating for as part of that, if it does happen, is to allow these visa programs to become much more small business friendly. I mean, if you've ever tried to deal with, say, H-1B as a small company, you realize just how difficult it is, how much forward planning is required, and how much large companies essentially take all those slots. So we're trying to find ways to make those programs much more usable for small companies and to ensure that they really can find the workers that they need as that goes forward. The other thing that's going to happen early in 2023 is the debt limit is going to expire. Now, I don't know if you're all schooled up on federal fiscal policy or not, but there's two things that control federal spending. One is the appropriations bill, or continuing resolution that they pass every so often, that basically outlines how much the government can spend and also how much the government's going to tax. And of course, we want to put the difference there, and that's our deficit. But the other component is this debt limit. So they basically write these laws. Say, well, we're going to tax this much, we're going to spend this much, and we're going to borrow the balance. But they have to pass an additional law that actually then allows the borrowing itself that they've already said they're going to do, which may sound crazy, but that's what we have. So there's going to be, we're going to hit up against the current debt limit, maybe as soon as the end of the first quarter of 2023. And that's probably about when they're going to set the next spending bill to expire also. So we're going to have this big conflagration in Washington around March, April of 2023, where the sky's going to fall, we're up against the debt limit, we can default on our credit. The government also might shut down as a result of the spending bill, and so there's going to be a lot of negotiation around that. I think some folks on the Hill are already planning to use that as a leverage point to get the sort of things they want. On the Republican side, what they're looking for is reduced spending. So it is interesting to think about. We just heard earlier about the inflation, and we may well be in a recession. So we could be having a period here of stagflation, where we're seeing a recession at the same time that we have inflation, which is a real conundrum for policymakers, because you want to spend money and reduce interest rates to grow us out of an economic slump, and you want to do the exact opposite to reduce inflation. So next spring, they're going to be faced with this. The Fed is already facing this, but now the Congress is going to face this, because there's going to be pressure both to cut spending, but also to deal with the recession if there is one. So, so keep your eyes on that, because there could be some space also in that to extend some of the small business tax breaks. That's the final thing I'm going to call your attention to. I think is going to get a lot of attention next year, which is, you may recall in 2017, they passed a big tax cut bill. And part of that extended corporate tax breaks permanently. But tax breaks for passive entities and individuals, which is the vast majority of small companies, they all expire in 2025 or so. But some of them are different, but basically that's it. So that's going to set up, I think, a whole tax reform debate, but I think is really going to get going in the next couple of years. So we're going to be really engaged on the small business front to make sure that the changes that happen are beneficial for the small business community. So that's kind of my roundup of overall stuff, and I'll stop. I think we're going to have time for Rob and plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So I've thrown a lot of stuff on the table. I'm not sure which of those you're interested in, want to know more about, we'll get into that. Chris.
Does anybody have a burning question right now specific to this? Is there anything that you're noticing that is causing Congress to become more communicative, work across the aisle, less partisan?
No, I've been doing this work for over 30 years now, and it just gets, when I think it can't get more partisan and more nasty, it gets more partisan and more nasty. So I don't see any forces that drive us that cooperate, unfortunately. Once in a while there's a line, and I think there could be some line. That's why I mentioned immigration. But I think you have, to put it in just partisan terms, the Democrats want to do something around DACA, and the Republicans want to do something to help the business community on jobs. And so there is an area there where there could be a win-win. But there aren't nearly as many of those, because most issues, they see either it's a bigger win for one part or the other, and too often, in my view at least, both sides are more concerned about not getting the other side a win than doing it much faster. So.
I just wanted everybody to be aware of the realities. Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. All right, Robert Hamor is up next from Foster Swift, and this specifically, it was a couple weeks ago that I interviewed you, I think, on the Michigan Business Network, and it was the first I'd heard of the Corporate Transparency Act, and it terrified me, and so I thought we better bring his expertise in front of this group to explain a little bit about what it is. So we'll do that, and then we'll do Q&A for both of them afterwards. All right? So please welcome Robert Hamor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Robert Hamor, Foster Swift. I'm a real estate and corporate attorney dealing with anything from a small business women's eyelash studio that I learned way too much about women's eyelash than I ever wanted to know, all the way up to a tier 1 auto supplier with about 1,500 employees. So I am here, as Chris said, to help terrify you guys. There's some new laws that are coming out called the Corporate Transparency Act, and first I have to give some credit to Michigan Business Network for spotting this issue and giving us the opportunity to speak about it, because no one is talking about it. No one's heard of it. It's not being discussed at most forums that I go to. It's not being discussed to a large degree in the legal community. This was a law passed on January 1st, 2021, and we're still getting rules that are being made. In fact, some rules just dropped, I think it was on November 30th, regarding the Corporate Transparency Act. And this is truly an act that is going to implicate most small businesses. Some estimates say about 85% of the businesses within the United States are going to have some form of reporting requirement under it. So to get down to it, the Corporate Transparency Act is going to be a giant federal database. Just like a voter database, just like any other aggregation of data, where the federal government is looking for information on smaller businesses that usually fall through the regulatory gaps. So it's not the the large airport or the tier 1 auto supplier, or the large developer with 500 employees that's used to having government reporting requirements and are used to being obligated to turn over information. They're focusing on the mom and pop shops, the small business owner, the small contractor, the small gas station owner, real estate holding companies. And the Corporate Transparency Act is really going to require, if you are a reporting company, and we're going to get into what these buzzwords are here in a second. And by the way, I don't have enough time to go through all the Corporate Transparency Act. Please see me or Kim, and we can get you a slide deck with more information to kind of analyze your situation. But if you're a reporting company, which is basically any company that's formed by filing a document with a state, LLC, corporation, anything like that, and you don't fall under one of the 23 exemptions, you are going to have to report to a federal database all of your beneficial owner information, we'll define that in a second, as well as your company information and incorporator information. Now, the first question is, what is a reporting company, right? Do I fall under this, this reporting requirement? And without going through all the exceptions that are out there, certain nonprofits, certain banks, basically anyone that already reports their information to the government, right? If you are a business that has less than $5 million in gross receipts and 20 employees within the United States, you're a reporting company. You have to turn over your information. Now, what does this mean? It means the small business that's out there, but it also means the large business that may have 4 or 5 or 6 subsidiaries, because they had good counsel that structured things in order to limit their liability, right? You have an offshoot with a certain product. We want to make sure that if something goes wrong, you don't expose your main company. We form a subsidiary for you, right? We provide that insulation. Well, maybe that subsidiary now is a reporting company. So again, this is something that affects everyone. Don't just think because, hey, I'm over $5 million and 20 employees, I'm exempt from it. You really need to drill down into the data. And what we'll find if you are a reporting company, you're really going to have to report 3 sets of information to the federal government. One is the beneficial owner information. What a beneficial owner is, anyone that owns 25% or more of the company or exercises substantial control. Very vague definition. And by the way, intentionally vague, intentionally broad. There are certain tests that are out there, any C-level employees, director-level employees, anyone that has substantial influence over important decisions. What does that mean, right? Well, if you have the ability to direct lines, to get in and out of areas, if you have the ability to hire and fire, C-level employees, if you can, decide whether or not we want to breach or enter into major contracts, those are all potentially indications that you have significant control or significant authority over a reporting entity, and now your name and information is in the database. There are certain exceptions, and it kind of muddies the water. One of the biggest exemptions is if you're an employee and that substantial control is based solely as your status as an employee. Well, okay, great, wonderful. But if you have one stock option share, if you own one share of that company, now you're potentially in there, right? So again, it's just a web of confusion as to figuring out, first, are you a reporting company? Second, who actually needs to be reported as a beneficial owner? You need to report your incorporation information. Whoever makes the decision to actually start the entity, all that information is going to be in this database. Scares the attorneys like you wouldn't believe, right? My name's going to be associated with 100 companies, right? I don't want that. But again, it's going to be a requirement. And then lastly, you'll have to report company information. So the real takeaway here and the real concern is not necessarily that there is a reporting requirement. Happens all the time. People report stuff to the government, on a daily basis. We're going to have to report people's names. We're going to have to report people's date of birth. To report their home address, a copy of their driver's license or passport. Not the number, a copy of their driver's license or their passport into a giant federal database that, let's be honest, never will get hacked. I mean, I don't think any federal database has ever been hacked before, right? So again, this is something that should be a concern. There should be a discussion about it. The fact that there isn't is kind of a sign that people don't know about this. And I don't know who's going to lead the charge to try to amend these laws, but again, it's not getting the traction that it should be getting from the business community. And again, just thank you to NBN for recognizing this issue and giving us an opportunity to speak. We expect that this law is going to take effect based on rules and regulations that were just issued January 1st, 2024. So it's not that far off. And yes, there will be legal challenges to it. I don't know how successful they're going to be. So again, companies need to start preparing for this. And how they can do that is, one, start getting with their HR people. You don't know unless you know your compensation program, you know who has stock options, you know who has any sort of ownership interest until you start running those numbers and you figure out people's job descriptions. HR is going to play a huge impact into that. Start getting with your counsel. If your counsel isn't talking about the Corporate Transparency Act, they need to learn about it really quick. Because again, even the large entity, they have some subsidiaries that need to be reported. And it's going to take a while in order to gather all this information. Now, the good news is this. The CBO estimates that it's only going to cost companies $85 a year to comply. Yeah, I don't know any compliance that takes $85 a year, okay? But again, this is going to be a large database that people are going to have to give their information. And again, most people don't know this is coming. So whether you're pro the database, whether you're anti the database, doesn't matter. We just need to start talking about this. We need to start preparing for it. And like I said, companies can right now start worrying about and start doing the research they need in order to be able to start reporting this beneficial ownership. Because I saved the best for last. If you don't, there are not only civil penalties, but potentially criminal penalties as well. So any small business, any real estate holding company, all of that stuff is going to be in a giant federal database that you guys are going to be populating yourselves. I will see you in the database because I'll be there as well. So.